instead of the usual gidin, the usual sinews that are used, he used linen to tie the Sefer Torah together. What do you say? Instead of gidin. So we're going to discuss right now. We're going to get into that discussion exactly this the laws of
Rabbi.
What's yes.
How were the subjects of the Gemara determined? Like how did they decide to discuss this at this point? In other words, that it's such a ramble of topics. I'm just curious how they formed how it was organized or how it was discussed. Is it just freestyle where they just go from one topic to the other, whatever they wanted to discuss?
So, I mean, the way the Gemara, I think the Gemara puts things together in a certain style because everything was originally done orally.
Right.
And based on orally, and then you would a lot of times want to, the same rabbi, you would want to say, if a certain rabbi said certain halachot, so even if they were random topics, but if the rabbi had a comment, he had a chidush, he had a novel idea on different topics, so sometimes you would quote the rabbi, this same rabbi said this rabbi said that, the same rabbi, even if they're totally different topics, they would group them together, and that would be easy for the memory.
But the recording followed the oral discussions that were just repeated from generation to generation, or they captured whatever they could capture?
I would think Ravina Rav Ashi, who organized the Gemara, they decided what is fit to put into the Gemara. Not everything that was said, not all the discussion finds itself in the Gemara. Some find itself in other places, in Torah Kahanim. Not everything made it into the Gemara. So whatever they felt should be included in the Gemara, they put into the Gemara, and many times if they felt many different statements of the certain rabbi are very important for us to know. So even if they would be random topics, but as long as it's the same rabbi, many times they would quote that rabbi, and that's what's happening over here. We have Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda made a statement. We just had yesterday about the discussion who wrote the last 8 psukim of the Torah, and Rabbi Yehuda had a opinion on the matter, and it was a machloket. There was a machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia. So now the Gemara is discussing another, because this is going to be the third opinion, third issue regarding Rabbi Yehuda. And how we got to it is because we're talking about Ori Miklat. So the first thing that Rabbi Yehuda was talking about is why the language in Sefer Yeshua was a strong language of Daber, when Hashem speaks to Yeshua. So Rabbi Yehuda gave his opinion on the matter. Then the Gemara got into another issue of Rabbi Yehuda regarding the last 8 psukim of the Torah. But that was also connected to Ari Miklat, because it says he wrote the Yeshua wrote the words in the Sefer Torah Elakim. So some say it's referring to he wrote about the Ari Miklat. So it's still connected to our subject Ari Miklat. But now this has nothing to do, like you said, with Ari Miklat. This is a total independent idea. But the only common denominator is it's the rabbi, the rabbi. It's the same rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda. And that's what the Gemara is bringing another statement from Rabbi Yehuda. So, Sefer Shetfaro B'Pishtin. By the way, Ms. Jaime, sometimes, I like tangents. So sometimes tangents are very good. It keeps everybody, it keeps everybody's interest sometimes, I think. I don't think that's the reason why they grouped it together, but hopefully we could appreciate it.
Okay.
So Sefer Shetfaro B'Pishtin. You have a Sefer Torah that was sewn together with linen. Head of the Gidin. Pligi ba Rabbi Yehuda v'Rameya. Now we're on 11a2, the top of the page. There's a machloket between these two rabbis, and also what's similar, it's as the other two cases, that we don't have clear recall which rabbi said what. We know the two rabbis are arguing on it. One said this, one said that, one in Morris. But since the Gemara doesn't recall which one said what, so the Gemara just says one rabbi said this and one rabbi said that. If you would recall which rabbi said what, you would say this rabbi said this, this rabbi said that. But we don't recall in that they didn't remember which rabbi is behind which opinion. Even though in general it's very important to know which rabbi is behind which opinion, because if you know which rabbi is behind which opinion, we have certain general rules of who we follow in halacha. You know, generally speaking, let's say if you have a machloket between the Rabbanan and an individual, you would generally go with the rabbis because the rabbis are the majority opinion. So it's important to know that if the Rabbanan said it, Rabbi Yehuda said it. But then you have different rules. You know, you have Rabbi Yehuda against this rabbi against this rabbi who like you have Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Generally, it's Beit Hillel. Or you have Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish, where law follows Rabbi Yochanan generally. So here we have this dispute. Morris, we are on 11A2, top of the page. So we have the Sefer Shtafa B'Tibisha. Pligi Bar Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. There's a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir on this subject. Chad Amar Kosher. One says that the Sefer Torah is kosher. The Chad Amar Posa. And one says the Sefer Torah is invalid. If you notice, on the word pasul, there's a little aleph. That little aleph takes you to the top, my Gemara, to the top left corner, which is called the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah, the eye of the law, where it tells you where you can find this law. You see where it says, Mr. Safdie, Morris? It's Maimon, that stands for the Rambam, Moshe ben Maimon, Perek Tes, Mehilchas Sefer Torah, Halacha Yud Gimel. You take out the Rambam, and then you'll see he'll quote this halacha, the Smag, some called Sefer Mitzvahs Gedolos, Mitzvah Asein Chafei, Torah Shulchan Aruch, Yeridei Simarish Ayeches. That's what you'll find in the Shulchan Aruch. The Smag is a Sefer Smag. It's a couple of volume set. It's not so commonly used, but it's a beautiful set, and I recommend. He has an amazing introduction. One day we gotta learn his introduction, Mr. Safdie. Remind me, his introduction is fascinating. It's so much farm source. It's a fascinating introduction where he writes. I like to do it with the college students, where he writes. It's pretty much he talks about how there's pretty much almost no mitzvah that you could do without the Torah Shabbat. One of Yosef, he shows you. Take a mitzvah. You have a mitzvah to put up mezuzah. Where on the door do you put a mezuzah? How high does it have to be? Which side of the door it has to be? Well, the Torah says pre-Eitz Hadah. What is a pre-Eitz Hadah? It's an etrog. You need sit. How do you make the sit? So the Torah doesn't give all the details. You need the Torah Shabbat Peh. You need the oral Torah and that's what Hashem was doing when Hashem spoke to Moshe was in Har Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. Morning Yosef Tzaddik. What was Hashem doing? He was teaching him the oral Torah.
Morning,
40 days and nights. Morning. That's morning Yosef. That's what we're doing. And therefore people have to appreciate the Rabbanim, and it talks about the Takanot of the Rabbanim. A fascinating introduction of appreciating the Torah Shabbat Peh and recognizing we pretty much can't do anything without having the oral law. The Torah was given with a written law and the oral law. Okay. So the Gemara says, Yosef, we're talking about a Sefer Torah that was sewn together, not with the gidin, not with the sinews, rather was sewn together with linen. And there's a machloket in the Gemara if the Sefer Torah is valid or invalid. So the Gemara is going to explain what is the machloket, what is the dispute based on. So Sefer Torah shetafu b'pishtin. We know you can't sew wool and linen together on a garment. Here we want to talk, that's shatneh. Here we're talking about using linen to stitch the Sefer Torah together. So what's the issue over here? So the Gemara says, morning, Dr. Navid.
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov. So the Gemara says, we're on Yud Aleph Amar Aleph, Dr. Navid. 11a. We are discussing, we are in the middle of about a third up from the top of the page. The first word of the line is Elokim. We are discussing a Sefer Torah that was stitched with linen. Instead of stitching the Sefer Torah with the sinews, the proper gidin, the gidin is like these long, hard, strong strings. These strings that they use to stitch a Sefer Torah. But instead of using, if you look at a Sefer Torah, it has these strings that attach the pages together. But instead of using these strings, these sinews, these gidin, they used linen to stitch the Sefer Torah together. And that's the question of the Gemara: is the Sefer Torah valid or invalid because it was stitched with not the sinews, not the gidin? That's the question of the Gemara. So two opinions on the matter. So the Gemara says the man di amah pasul. The one that says it's pasul is because the ksiv, the pasuk says, the man tia Torah Hashem beficha. The Torah says regarding tefillin that you put on the tefillin, and as a result of you putting on the tefillin, it's Torah Hashem beficha. You have the Torah of Hashem in your mouth. Ti b'chozek yod. Right? What's the end of the pasuk? The pasuk says that Mati Torah Hashem beficha ki b'chozek ki b'yad chazaka posiyacha Hashem b'mitzrayim. When you put on tefillin, and that's one of the messages you need to get when you put on the tefillin, you have to think about, when you put on your tefillin, you're supposed to think about the idea that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim with great power, with great strength. And that's what the parasha of Kadesh and Vayikviyacha. As you know, in the Sephardi shuls, they open up the minyan here. Kadesh Likol B'chor. Kadesh Likol B'chor and Vayikviyacha are two of the four parashos that are written in your tefillin. If you would open up your tefillin, you will find the parasha of Kadesh, of Vayikviyacha, and Shema V'hoyim Shemoah. Those are the four parashos that you'll find in your tefillin. And each parasha, and they have a message that you need. The Torah wants these in your tefillin because they want you to know what is the message of Kadesh Likol B'chor Petach Arechem. What's the message? Yod Chazaka Asiyach Hashem Mitzrayim.
Strong hand.
Yod Chazaka, and you recognize God's power, God's involvement in the world. That's what we have to remember every day, right, Morris? That's what we put on the tefillin, and that's what the pasuk says. Leman tiyeh Torah Hashem beficha ki b'yad chazaka. And Hashem says, I want you to tie this to your hand and put it on your head. That's what the Torah says, right, Mrs. Safdie? That's what I want for you. I want these parashiyot. I want the Shema on your head. Shartam lo tayedecha. I want v'hoyim Shema. Hashem is one. Accepting Hashem is the one ruler of the world has to be on your head. V'hoyim Shemoah, reward and punishment. Where does that have to be? V'hoyim Shemoah, I want you to shout it. I want you to tie it. That's what the Torah says. I want this message to be tied to you. I want it to be so attached to you, tie it to you. Tie it. And in the old days, they would fill in the whole day. The message was tied to them the whole day. So, but now when the Torah is talking about tefillin, it says, Leman tiyeh Torah Hashem. It refers to the message about the tefillin, and it connects it to Torah Hashem. It's called the Torah Hashem should be beficha. Why does it refer to the message of this message and of going out of Egypt, the power of Hashem, and referring to it as Torah Hashem, and it by using the word Torah Hashem, the whole Torah is referred to as a Torah Hashem. So it's connecting the whole Torah to this message of tefillin, to this idea of tefillin. By talking about the tefillin, by referring to the tefillin as Torah Hashem, by connecting the whole Torah to tefillin, is teaching us the Torah is comparing the whole Torah as tefillin. But the fact that it calls tefillin the Torah Hashem, Leman tiyeh Torah Hashem beficha, v'iskish kol haTorah, we are comparing kol haTorah kula to tefillin. The whole Torah, but is comparing to tefillin. As Rashi explains, the beginning of the pasuk is talking about tefillin. And it's talking about tefillin, and then it connects the whole Torah. It refers to the whole Torah in this context, and connecting to the tefillin. So it's comparing the whole Torah to tefillin. Ma tefillin, just as tefillin is halacha. This is Mr. Safdie's point. Halacha leMoshe miSinai. There was halacha leMoshe miSinai l'tofram begidin. There's a special halacha leMoshe miSinai. How you have to tie the tefillin. They have to tie the tefillin with gidin, with these sinews, these strong pieces of you have to tie the tefillin. So too, af kol.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning, Mike. The Tofram begidin. It's teaching all things. It's teaching us a Sefer Torah. Whenever you have to go, you have to tie something together. When it's a Torah item, you would have to, in order for it to be kosher, it has to be with gidin. So, Mike, we welcome Mike. We just said we're talking about the idea of a Sefer Torah that, when you, even the stitching of the Sefer Torah, something that you would feel, it's just the stitching, it's not the writing, but even the stitching in one Ariel, the Sefer Torah has certain laws. And one opinion says that if the stitching is stitched with linen, you took a thread of linen and you stitched the parchment, the pages together of the Torah, it's no good, because we find that by tefillin, there's a special law that tefillin has to be stitched together with gidin. Let's say you have your tefillin, and the sofa is writing the tefillin on the parchment, and let's say on the shelyad you have 4 parashot written on one cloth. There's 4 parashot. Your 4 parashot tefillin are written on one, so to speak. It's not separate sections. Each one's a separate section. Like in your tefillin, you have 4 separate compartments of your tefillin of the head of the shalosh. There's 4 compartments, and on your head, each parasha is in a separate compartment in your tefillin. If you'll ever open up, you'll see on the top, it's 4 different sections, and each section of the Shema is in one place. Vayim Shemoah, Kadesh Vayikaviacha. You have 4 sections, and not necessarily the order that I said it, but you have 4 sections on your shalosh. It's written, it's 4 different pieces of parchment. In your shelyad, it's all one. It's one cloth. It's not 4 separate. But if it's stitched together, correct? How do you stitch it together? You have to stitch it together with gidin, with these sinews, hard, strong sinews. That's what we say there is 613 mitzvot in the Torah. Rimachi varav shesagidim. The 613 mitzvot correspond to the 248 mitzvahs aseh that you need to perform, corresponding to the 248 limbs in your body. And the shesa, the 365 los asehs, you think that you can't do, correspond to the 360 shesa gidav, the 365 gidim, those sinews, those things that you have in your body that connect the different parts of your body. So that's these sinews from an animal have to be the ones that are used to tie the tefillin together. And the Torah compares the whole Torah to tefillin. So the Gemara says, what's the point? Why does the Torah compare the whole Torah to tefillin? So he says, it's comparing to tefillin regarding this to teach us this law, that Torah, a Sefer Torah, needs to be similar to tefillin in the way you stitch together. That's the opinion, one of the opinions of the Gemara. The Idach, the other rabbi who says no, The other rabbi says if you stitch a Sefer Torah together with linen, and that's how you put the columns of the Sefer Torah, the parchments together, you use linen. The other rabbi said that it is fine, it is kosher. So what does he do with this hekesh? We just found there's a beautiful hekesh. The Torah is comparing the two. So what does he do with this hekesh? So the Gemara says, so how does he not learn this way? The Torah is comparing the whole Torah to tefillin. So the Gemara says, he holds the comparison is for something else. Ki iskish, when the Torah is comparing the Sefer Torah to tefillin, is regarding what type of item you write the Sefer Torah on. The idach, he says, the hekesh, the comparison is not for everything. Ki lemuta beficha. In order, the Sefer Torah has to be written on the skin, on the leather of a kosher animal. If it's not written on a kosher animal, if it's written on leather from a non-kosher animal, let's say it's written from a camel's leather, it is not kosher. Why? Because the pasuk says by tefillin, beficha. The Torah talks about man tia Torat Hashem beficha. Morning, Kevin. When the Torah is comparing Torat Hashem to tefillin, it's specifically comparing it Torat Hashem beficha, regarding the law of something. It's regarding the law of something that has to do with your mouth. That has to do with your mouth, with meaning to say regarding kosher food, kosher animal. That's what you need to use for a Sefer Torah. Let's look at the Rashi. Rashi says, Ki iskish lemuta beficha. The Rashi says, Tiksiv b'haikra beficha. The pasuk says here, your mouth. Min hamuta beficha. The pasuk is saying it has to be from something that is kosher to go into, something that's permitted to go into your mouth. That is what is be able to be used for a Sefer Torah. That's what's able to be used for tefillin. Tefillin, you have to, by the fact the Torah says beficha by tefillin, is telling us now you need to write tefillin, and you write tefillin on parchment. The leather from the skin from the skin, from the animal. What type of skin? Does it have to be a kosher animal, or could you even write tefillin on a parchment leather on the skin from a not kosher animal? So the pasuk says beficha. The Torah talks about your mouth when it comes to tefillin, and the drash is your mouth. The emphasis of your mouth is teaching us that tefillin has to be written on something that an animal that you are able to eat. You hear that, Kevin? If you can't eat it, you can't write your tefillin on such a skin. And that's where the hekesh is about. The comparison of Torat Hashem, the comparison that would compare the rest of the Torah, meaning Sefer Torah to tefillin, is specific regarding this law of writing the Sefer Torah on something which is kosher animal. Excluding writing a Sefer Torah, you can't write a Sefer Torah on an animal that's not, skin of an animal that's not kosher. But it's not coming to compare Sefer Torah in all aspects to tefillin, in all laws of writing and sewing. And therefore, one rabbi says you could have the phenomenon that tefillin has a halacha on Moshe Sinai that it has to be with gidin stitched together. But a Sefer Torah, not necessarily, this opinion holds, has to be stitched together with gidin, with sinus. It can be stitched together with linen, because we're not comparing the Torah's comparison to tefillin is limited to what you write on. In the subject matter of the ficha, what comes into your mouth, something that you eat that's kosher, that's what you can write a Sefer Torah on, tefillin on, that's what you need to, a Sefer Torah also has to be similar to that. But it's not comparing it to the stitching together. Is that clear? Does anybody have any question on this? Mr.
Yes,
Safdie?
Rabbi.
Yes, Mike.
What's the comparison between the tefillin and the subject that were on the Arei Miklat?
Right. So when this is a total independent law, it does not have anything to do with Arei Miklat. It does nothing to do with the cities of refuge. We're just quoting a third halacha from one of the rabbis that spoke about the Arei Miklat. He had two different things that he spoke about the Arei Miklat. So once we're quoting that rabbi, we're quoting another thing that the rabbi said, even though it's not connected to the Arei Miklat.
It's from the rabbi, I get it.
But it's from this rabbi. We're just quoting different things that this rabbi said. We're grouping the teaching of the rabbi together.
And Rabbi, yesterday we saw something about the 8 Pesukim, right?
Right.
We said,
right. Correct. So one of these rabbis spoke about the 8 psukim. Correct.
And what was the 8 Pesukim? Can you remind me, please?
Yes. There's the last 8 psukim in the Torah. The question is the last. See, there is the last 8 psukim of the Torah.
Is it Yeshua or is it Moshe Rabbeinu?
Moshe Rabbeinu. That was part of the discussion yesterday about the last 8 psukim of the Torah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Safdie, any comment on the Gemara? Right. See, the Gemara doesn't discuss it, but it would seem that way, yes. See, the Gemara here didn't discuss about mezuzah, we have to see, but so far, Sefer Torah and tefillin. Right, so we're saying, first the Gemara's discussion is, if you sew the Sefer Torah with linen, is it kosher or not? And the question is, do we compare it to tefillin or not? The given is tefillin that was sewn with linen is no good. Why? Tefillin is halacha Moshe Sinai, as Mr. Safdie said earlier. It has to be sewed with gidin. So one rabbi says, the same way tefillin has to be sold with gidin, there's a hekesh that compares the rest of the Torah to tefillin, and therefore a Sefer Torah should also have to be sold with tefillin, and according to logic would say as well, mezuzah, right? Because we're comparing it to tefillin, kol Torah, so kol Torah would be Sefer Torah, would be mezuzah. That's what the logic would dictate. The other rabbi says no. The only thing it's compared to, in one aspect are we comparing Sefer Torah to tefillin, is regarding the type of parchment you write on. It has to be from a kosher animal. That's the only thing that the Torah is comparing Sefer Torah to tefillin. It's not comparing Sefer Torah to tefillin in the way you stitch it together. It's limited. The second rabbi is limiting the comparison of Sefer Torah to tefillin. He's agreeing that there is a hekesh. He's agreeing there is a comparison Sefer Torah to tefillin. The Torah is comparing Sefer Torah to tefillin. But the question is, how far is this comparison going?
Rabbi, everything in tefillin is from the Sefer Torah.
All the things that are written in the tefillin are partial, are from the Torah itself. But the question is the details of how to write the tefillin, what type of parchment you write on, how do you sew the tefillin together? That's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's the oral Torah that will explain. But it's given from Hashem to Moshe. Like it was given over from generation to generation, a halacha l'Moshe Sinai of what laws are, how it's supposed to be done. Meaning to say, when Hashem gave the Torah, not everything was written down. There's a certain amount of the Torah that's called Torah Shebektav, the written Torah, and there's something called the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. Hashem wanted us not to have everything written. He wanted us to have many things that we will only know by talking to someone, by giving over to someone. Not that you could just open up something and read it. You have to have your mind should be constantly not relying that you have it written down. You have to always have things to memory.
Down before the destruction of Second Temple because they knew it's going to happen, right?
Say that again.
The Sanhedrin wrote down the Torah Sheba'al Peh before the destructions of Second Temple because they knew.
We have to look exactly, exactly when it was written. There's a discussion exactly when it was written down. But the bottom line is it was written down because they said they have to write it down because the oral law. Because if they wouldn't write it down, they would be forgotten. So they in a certain sense this was a special allowance, so to speak. They actually broke the Torah in order to keep the Torah. But nobody on their own could say, I know what to do, how to break the Torah to keep the Torah. There are people that will say, people make up ideas. They drive to Shul on Shabbat. They feel that's the way to save the Torah. That's not the way to do it. But the great rabbis said they gave an allowance to write down the Torah. So that's what the Gemara is saying over here. So Amar Rav. So the Gemara continues. That's what the Gemara says. It's only the hekish, the comparison from Sefer Torah to Tefillin is specifically regarding something that has to do with your mouth, eating something that's kosher to eat. That's what you can write. You write the Tefillin on, the Sefer Torah on. It's not comparing it to everything else. L'ilchotov lo iskish. For the halachot, it's not coming to compare. And Rashi says that the comparison is, good morning, everybody. The comparison of Sefer Torah to Tefillin is, this opinion holds, is specific for what's written in the pasuk itself. We're discussing here if a Sefer Torah was stitched together, Gary and Jake, a Sefer Torah that was written, stitched together with linen. Instead of stitching the Sefer Torah with sinews, the gidin, the hard sinews, they use linen. And the machloket in the Gemara, is a Sefer Torah invalid as a result of that, or is it valid? So two opinions. And the Gemara says the machloket, the argument is based on, we have a pasuk that compares the whole Torah to Tefillin. It says, "Aman tieh Torah Hashem beficha, ki b'yod chazak asyacha." By calling, and that's by the parish of Tefillin, it refers to Torah Hashem, the whole Torah. It connects the whole Torah to Tefillin, so it compares it in some way. So the question of the Gemara is it comparing it in all aspects? That just like Tefillin, if there's a halacha al Moshe Sinai, that if you sew the Tefillin together with linen, it will make it invalid. So too, by Sefer Torah. What do we say? No, the Gemara says. The hekish, the comparison is limited to what's written in the pasuk. And the pasuk says, Torah Hashem beficha. It's talking about something that has to do with your mouth. Your mouth, something that's kosher that you're able to eat. An animal hide. That's what you call it, the hide an animal that's from a kosher animal. That's what you can write a tefillin on. That's what you compare Sefer Torah to. You can only write a Sefer Torah on the skin of a kosher animal. Similar to tefillin, it has to be a kosher animal. And the Torah is comparing Sefer Torah to tefillin specifically regarding the item that's written in the pasuk. What's the item, the context that's written in the pasuk? About your mouth, about food, about item that has to do with eating, about a kosher animal. That's where it's compared. So therefore, since it's only in the context of a kosher animal, so therefore you can't compare it to something that's not written in the pasuk. The idea of stitching a tefillin with gidin, with the sinews and not linen, is not written in the pasuk. That's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Therefore, the comparison does not apply to that. That's what this rabbi holds. The comparison is only Sefer Torah to tefillin on what's written in the pasuk. And what's written in the pasuk is only something that has to do with what you write the tefillin on. So written in the pasuk is talking about beficha, something that you eat. an animal that's kosher. So that's what the Gemara says, two opinions. And like we pointed out before from the Rambam, it seems that it would be pasul from the Shulchan Aruch. We didn't research it, but the letter, the aleph, goes to the Ein Mishpat, the eye of the law, which takes it to the Rambam, which seems to say that it would not be valid if it's stitched together with the Sefer Torah, stitched together with linen instead of the sinus. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav, Chazinu l'tfilin, Rav, I saw the tfilin debei Rav, and some have a different text, not tfilin, sifrei. He saw the Sefer Torah of Beirav, the Bechavivi, the Tfira Bekisnat. Rav says, I saw the Sefer Torah of my uncle, of Chia, that they were, my uncle of Chia, that they were stitched together with linen, that he held that you were allowed to stitch the Sefer Torah with linen. And the Gemara says, maybe that's why the Rambam doesn't agree with that opinion, because the Gemara concludes the halacha does not follow. You cannot stitch a Sefer Torah with linen. We said there's an opinion that says that the comparison of Sefer Torah's tefillin is specifically regarding what you write on, but not the stitching. That's one opinion. The other opinion says no. The comparison is for all halacha. Stitch. Right, because this rabbi held, yes, right. This rabbi held that a Sefer could be stitched with linen. This rabbi held the comparison of Sefer Torah to tefillin is not regarding, is only regarding. No, but he stitched the Sefer Torah with linen, even though the other opinion says you're not allowed to stitch the Sefer Torah with linen. So how did he able to stitch the Sefer Torah with linen? Isn't there a comparison to Sefer Torah to tefillin? It's just tefillin can't be stitched with linen. How can he stitch the Sefer Torah with linen? So he says, because he says that the comparison, Sefer Torah linen does not, it's only regarding what's written in the pasuk, which is the kosher animal, what you write it on. It has nothing to do with how you stitch the animal. And therefore he says you could stitch it with linen. The Gemara concludes you cannot stitch a Sefer Torah with linen. Everybody agrees in our Gemara. Everybody agrees tefillin is halacha Moshe Mishinai. You cannot stitch with linen. You have to stitch it. Right? You have to stitch it with gidin, the sinners. Yeah. Only gidin. Right. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining, Gary. Welcome back. You know we take attendance. You know that.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a great day.
Thank you. Hey, thank you for joining.
Yom tov.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you all for
Thank
being
you,
on.
you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm gonna miss you. Hatzlacha Rabbah. Thank you.